So we're going to discuss creating and maintaining safe programs in early childhood education programs. In these slides, we'll be introducing the creation and then maintaining safe programs, going over what comprises a safe program and components of safe programs, an overview of licensing regulations because most deficiency and citations are from either safety or health, then how we communicate safety to our families, and then additionally how we keep our staff safe. The Department of Health and Human Services, and they have inspections in division, and what they saw in their oversight around the country, they saw some pretty horrifying things and some pretty severe safety lapses. So they detail why it's important that we provide background checks and safety checklists is to keep children safe every day. A lot of times when we are living in our houses or we're in our programs every day, we become accustomed to what we see. So the mold spot on the ceiling continues to grow and it's just not something that we see. Or there's a cord dangling from a bottle warming container and an infant could pull it, but it's just become something that we've become so used to seeing that it doesn't click with us. So having a checklist or having another person come in can show us where the lapses are in our programs. So we're going to go over some of the components of safe programs. The biggest thing is your supervision and ratios. That's why an analyst who comes out, and that's why any accrediting body, and that's why Title V lowers their ratio threshold, is because it is so important. Having staff maintaining ratios and providing adequate supervision and doing their counts is what keeps children safe. Another important thing is signing in and out. So making sure that whoever is coming to pick up the child is authorized by the parents to pick up that child and has ID proof for it. On our military bases, it's 100% ID checks at all times. So you might see a parent every day for 5 years that their child is in your program, and you will check that parent's IDs every day. So that's one end of the spectrum. A lot of people know the parents and do not check the parent's ID every single day, but anybody new who's not the parents, you do need to check their IDs. And then background checks, and in that previous video they were talking about people who are living within the home and needing to have background checks because you need to make sure who's coming in and out of that house is safe. And just generally whoever your staff is, they need to pass a background check in order to work with children. Staff needs to be, especially staff who is supervising children, needs to have CPR and first aid. You need to keep a log of accident reports and incident reports, and we will go over incident reports too about licensing because it's a licensing requirement. And then planning and practicing for our worst. We've had a hard summer with hurricanes and earthquakes and fires, so disaster planning, fire drills, lockdowns, rations in case something terrible was to happen is really important. And then storage of materials and medication. So, the bad stuff bleaches away. And then the good stuff, the medication, is locked and away from the children who don't need to access it. And then our space, the naps that we have. So, children aren't breathing onto each other when they're on their nap mat. Cribs aren't right next to each other. And then also in our play space, there needs to be enough active space so that children can run and jump and skip and play and splash water in the sensory table without creating hazards for the other children in the program. We have all of these components that we are implementing within our programs, and now we need to communicate these policies and procedures to other people. So accidents and incidents, it's a way for programs to give notice or to the parents about accidents that have happened. And then incidents are a little bit more. So something that's happened that's beyond an accident. This can be your own created form if you wanted to let parents know in writing something that happened that wasn't an accident but wasn't a behavioral issue. You might have your own incident report. And then licensing has its own incident report as well that needs to be turned into them if very specific things were to happen in your program. And we'll go over that in detail because a lot of people aren't even aware of this kind of requirement with licensing. Then there's safety checklists. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago. You guys created your own for caregivers or staff, or for where classrooms are. So this is where you would make sure to put things that needed to happen, or things that you needed to change within a classroom, and just make sure that it's stocked and ready for the day. There are no obvious hazards in the classroom. But it's also, if you're lucky enough to have a janitor or some kind of maintenance crew, or maybe people who come in on the weekends to help you, they would need their own safety checklist with equipment and materials that might need maintenance. Dishwashers, dryers, leaf blowers, things like that. And from them, you also hear about issues that you might not be able to resolve in the moment, things that you might need to keep on your list of nice things to have for capital improvements. And then a maintenance log goes into that as well. And then our emergency drills. How do we communicate what our lockdown drill is, our fire drill? And then just general disaster preparedness procedures and keeping of supplies within the classroom. And then it's optional, but it's good to have management talk about or discuss or even have a plan for serious injury or illness. The biggest part of this is anything where a child is going to need to be transported to a hospital. In the health policies, I talked about the child with epilepsy. So the first time she ever had a grand mal seizure where she's, falling to the ground and seizing, it was an immediate 911 call, and she was transported to Tri-City Medical. And so we sent her toddler staff with her, and then our assistant director followed in her own car and met the family there. So we didn't even wait for the family to go there. We just sent her straight away. And she was 1.5 and she was terrified. So we sent her primary caregiver with her, and she held her the entire time and in the emergency room until her parents were able to get there. And then our assistant director was able to follow to pick her up, to remain with the parents, and just to get everything under control. We were really lucky in that we had a program where we could spare 2 staff members. It might mean that I was in the classroom for some time, but it was also a program in which we were able to do that. If you're a smaller program or you're an FCC, how this is achieved, or even if it can be achieved, will be an issue that you have. One that you might need to resolve, and you might need to talk with your management team or your classroom teams or the other person that works in your home with you who helps you supervise children. So before we jump into policies and procedures and writing them, I just wanted to talk about how we keep our own staff safe. So you have injury, accidents, and incident reports for your staff as well. So if they're injured, if they have an accident like an owie or a boo-boo, or even if there's an incident that you need to report to licensing, how do you do that? So if somebody falls and gets really injured, you need to know where to send them, and you need to know the steps as per your insurance and your workers' comp. So there are typically workers' comp clinics where you send people if they were hurt. So for example, I got bit by a toddler in the classroom. Normally would have just been an accident report. I got an owie, except he bit me so hard that through my jeans, it broke my skin and I started bleeding. So then my manager at the time decided that I needed to go to the workers' comp clinic because they needed to do blood tests. So I ended up spending the rest of the day there. So they do blood tests, and then I had to go in 6 weeks later just to make sure that I didn't have anything contagious. So then that was an accident, that was an injury report, and they had to follow their procedures because it was a workers' comp claim, if I needed to be off work or anything like that. And then it actually was an incident report that we had created on our own to let the parent know that he had bit a staff member. We didn't tell her who, but she needed to know that this was a behavior that he had engaged in. Typically, you also want to do some kind of proactive staff safety training where you talk about back safety and lifting children. You probably listen to this once a year. Somebody comes in, or you have your manager talk to you about back safety and lifting children and correct diaper changing procedures, that type of stuff. So you're proactively kind of hitting the biggest incident of why staff is out in our field, which is, hurting yourself, particularly with your back with lifting kids. And then yearly, like on the job training, typically it's like, don't stand on rolling chairs, to put posters up in your classrooms. A big one is crafting mishaps, like glue gun mishaps and things like that. And then also general things that might affect our children, like maybe new staff needs to be reminded that you can't use thumbtacks in the classroom because that's a huge health and safety hazard for the children. I like to talk to my teams as well because they can usually identify workplace hazards. Like if one of their rugs is always flipping up and children keep falling on it, or they're falling on it, or they're tripping, then they can identify ways that we can keep our program safe for themselves and for the children. And then the janitor and cleaning staff, talking with them about what they do on a daily basis, how is it dangerous, and how can they take safety precautions. So walking by one of our safety guys, one of our maintenance guys years ago when we were lucky enough to have teams, and he was staining a fence with like no protective gear and no eyeglasses and no masks, and I was like, shouldn't you be protecting yourself a little bit more? Just making sure that they are taking care of themselves, because that's probably a bit more hazardous and they're coming more into contact with hazardous materials than we are in the classroom. So when we're communicating with parents, what we're going to be doing is telling them our safety policy. So how are we keeping your child safe? What are our ratios? What are our supervision? And that's typically the most important things, and the things that they want to know is they want to know how many people are taking care of their children, what's the ratio in the classroom, and how do we ensure that those ratios are met. Then we also want to let them know about our sign in and out procedures, knowing that somebody can't just come into their center and take their child. It's also to save your sanity, especially if it's state funded, knowing where to sign out, how important it is to sign out. And then also making sure that those emergency contacts are written out and they're updated regularly. And communicating this with parents is really important, especially single parents. So if something was to happen to them, who are going to be the next people on their list that can come and pick up this child? I've given out multiple sheets. I've had families give me 10 emergency contacts because that's how many people are in their tribe that are helping them support their children. And then I like to involve parents in fire drills and lockdown and evacuations, or fire safety and police safety, something like that, especially if like you are at a state-funded school that's in a school district. They do the full 9 yards. So flashing lights, it's super loud. If you have any children that are very anxious and you know that your fire drill or your lockdown drill or your evacuation drill is happening, inviting those parents to be part of that day so that they can help support their child and at least talk about it at home and what's going to happen, so that the child feels a little bit more prepared. But even for some of our anxious children, we knew a lockdown drill was coming, and so mom stayed and she laid down on the floor with the little girl and she was crying and she comforted her. And every year that they kind of worked on it, she felt more comfortable about it. Parents do love the fire visits and the police visits as well. Most adults do. They love to be able to sit in the back of a police car or touch, the shiny red fire truck. If any of you live in Oceanside or work in Oceanside, firefighter Ron, who's wonderful, and he comes out and he does an amazing job with the children and makes them love firefighters and all want to grow up to be firefighters. So parents love that type of stuff, and it communicates to the families that we take health and safety so seriously that we have our community volunteers come in and talk to us about this. And so that's really important to families, that they can support us in that way, and they know that we're supporting them in making our programs as safe as possible. So our online assignment is the second part of the health. So imagine explaining to a new family how you keep the children safe. So last time it was how you keep the children healthy. How do you keep children safe? So writing a policy for parents that describes how staff and management keep children safe. Ratios and supervision, daily safety checklists are going to be the biggest thing. And then how your program is going to handle hurt children and how families will be notified when they're hurt. So this would discuss minor injuries, bumps, bruises, owies, anything that would go in an accident report. And then also you might want to briefly talk about serious falls or incidents. How would parents be contacted in that case? Would it be a phone call? Would it be a text? Something like that. How are you going to tell parents both when they have had a minor injury and a more serious injury? For both health and safety policies, students are deciding what programs that they're writing about. So you can decide if it's from an FCC, school age, preschool, or infant toddler perspective, depending on where you work or what type of program you eventually want to run. And then different ages are going to have different considerations, especially for the safety one. So SIDS and safe sleep would be something that an infant room or an infant program would talk about. So that's part of keeping the child safe, is we place them on their back, there's no blankets, that type of stuff. School agers are going to be more concerned with playground safety, the monkey bars, how do we provide adequate supervision and ratios outside for our school agers who are being a little bit more adventurous outside. And then transportation, or if you're leaving the home, for FCC providers. So you're typically the ones that might be ferrying children to and from school every day in your own personal car, or you're walking. So how would you let families know in your FCC home how you're protecting children and how you're keeping them safe, and how you know what your emergency contacts are every time you leave the house? So in licensing regulations, once again, the California Department of Social Services core mission is to protect children, and licensing's core mission is to protect children and provide for their health and safety in childcare settings. So what we're going to do is go over some basic regulations, common deficiencies, and then things to be aware of. Once again, visiting the site and doing the orientation for the first time, or if you're changing positions, just the most important thing is that you're visiting this site, the community care licensing site, so you can understand what the regulations are, and then getting to know your own personal analyst in your own site. Seeing them more as an ally that can help you and can answer questions and can help you provide the most quality, safe program that you can. So there's an unusual incident or injury report, and this is a way that you kind of self-report to licensing anything unusual that happens. So it can be an outbreak of a communicable disease, specifically measles or mumps, and I believe that it also covers whooping cough as well. So any kind of large communicable disease that would be a health risk or a health policy risk that the county needs to know about, this is the form that you use in order to inform licensing. Suspected child abuse within your facility, and any kind of incident that would put a child in danger. A specific one would be a child leaving the center unattended if they were to wander away, or if they would leave intentionally, or if they were left during a field trip unattended at a park or something like that. Also, injuries to children that require more serious medical intervention. The most typical one is a broken bone from being on the monkey bars. This also could be a fire, aggressive acts, rape, anything like that that happens within your center that you need licensing and your analyst to know about. A lot of times people don't want to kind of self-report or tell about it, but if something very serious or unusual happened, more likely than not, licensing is going to find out about it or hear about it or know about it. And so telling them up front about the fire or the outbreak is going to save you in the long run, that you have self-reported and you have let your analyst know. So common deficiency, almost all of them are health, and most of the ones that are health are also safety as well. So disinfectants, cleaning solutions was one of the top ones. Safe, healthful, and comfortable accommodations, furnishings, and equipments, and this includes enough space for the children to play. Criminal records, backgrounds, criminal record exemptions, things like that. Without supervision, including visual observation of a teacher at any time. That's also a big one, as many of you know. The child care centers are clean, safe, sanitary, and good repair at all times. We talked about being clean, safe, and sanitary when we were talking about healthy programs, but in good repair. So if things are broken, they're taken out of the classroom and repaired and then returned. If they can't be returned, new ones are bought. Licensed child daycare centers need to have carbon monoxide detectors in the centers. You have to use your full legal signature in order to sign the child in and out. And then, like I said in the previous slide about unusual incidents, within 24 hours of it happening, you need to report it to your analyst. So right now, if you were to go to licensing, the front page of their website is all about disaster and emergency preparedness. The interesting thing that I just learned by going to that site today is because they do daycare facilities that might be long-term, or overnight because of migrant care, or they do facilities where the children live, like Polinsky, and community care licensing also covers adult care. They actually have where you could evacuate your senior center or your overnight care. So I thought that was really interesting in that they give you places to evacuate and places to call for support. But right now, because of how devastating this fire was, the last thing that I heard was that it went 14 miles. So the fire traveled 14 miles in 2 hours. So it just ripped through Santa Rosa at just an incredible speed. And as we've seen, there was a lot of loss of life and a lot of loss of property. So they want you to have as much information as possible right now with FEMA, with giving you plans to evacuate, support for families and children, where to evacuate, earthquake preparedness, and planning guides. So right now would probably be a great way if you don't have everything you need to plan for the worst, then go to licensing, download this information, and start making the plan for your FCC or with your management team, how you're going to provide for your center in the worst case scenario. We touched briefly on medication and providing for the complex medical needs of some of the children who might be in your program if they were to have epilepsy or severe food allergies or ADHD. Part of the accommodations that the program would provide would be dosage of these medications. So we need to remember the 5 R's, which is from a registered nurse, Judith Calder. And this is from the health and safety notes from the California Child Care Health Program. And it's from a sheet called Administering Medication, and it's a PDF that I have on Canvas for you if you wanted to have it. It's a good training for anybody who works with children or is going to be providing medication dosages for children. So the most important thing, and this is the 5 R's, is the right medication is given to the right child using the right amount at the right time, given by the right route. So we are going to give Manuel his EpiPen that's been provided us by the pediatrician after he has an allergic reaction by administering it into his thigh. So I know that it's the right medication. It's the EpiPen. It's given to Manuel, and I know that's the right child because I have a parental permission and authorization from them. The right amount because it's a specific EpiPen that's provided by a doctor. We have a prescription on it. It's at the right time after he's showing signs of having an allergic reaction, and I've been trained so I know the right route, which is into the muscle of the thigh. We need to have parental permission, so it's got to be in writing or filled in the child's record that we have the permission to provide EpiPens or antibiotics or ADHD medications, whatever it is. Then the medication is labeled with the dosing instructions and any specific or special instructions. A lot of times parents will want to half the medication, so we get half the antibiotic for here and half at home so that they're not trucking back medication over and over 9 or 10 days. The most important thing is that it needs to be already there. It needs to be the label from the pharmacy with the name and the dosing instructions on it. And then typically you will have a standard form where you'll keep track of the medications given so that you can notify other people in your program and also the parents to make sure that children aren't being double dosed. We write it down every time we do it. And then there are also nebulizer consent forms as well on the licensing page. So there's some specific oversight with sunscreen. So sunscreen is an over-the-counter drug. So since it's a non-prescription medication, it's got to be put on the child and their skin according to the product label directions. So we need to obtain in writing again. So we need approval and instructions from the child's parents or families or guardian in how we are supposed to put on this. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to have a sunscreen form if you're putting on sunscreen onto the child. And then you will follow that. So typically you write out a boilerplate sunscreen application procedure and you'll have the parent sign it, and that's something that's very easy to Google as far as how that is written. And then you would provide that to the parent so you could put sunscreen on it. It could also be part of your program that you do not put sunscreen on the children. And my daughter's summer camp over the summer, Even though they were at the beach, they were not allowed to put sunscreen on the children. So I had to do it before they went to school, and then I needed to make sure that they had hats and everything that they needed. So you either don't do it or you do, and if you do it, you need to have it written and on file for the children. So in conclusion, it's our responsibility to keep children safe while they're in our early childhood education programs. So they're out of their parents' care. How are we going to keep them safe? Licensing has a lot of regulations, and almost all of them are designed to keep children safe. Their regulations are in place to support systems and trainings that are going to maintain the safety policies and procedures in your classrooms. So please go out and look at licensing, get to know the regulations with how they have to do with safety, because most of the deficiencies in the citations are from health and safety perspective. So getting to know all of the regulations and making sure that you have all of the signed procedures from the parents and your medication is correctly labeled is really going to save you when it comes to any kind of site visits that you're getting from your analyst from licensing. So this week you're going to be reading pages 300 to 318 of your textbook. Then I have an additional reading. It's a guide to routines. It's from the Health and Safety Guide from the Program for Infant and Toddler Care, and it just talks about health and safety more from the approach from a classroom, and when we're talking about routines and things like that, how are we also keeping children healthy and safe? Our online assignment, which we've talked about in these PowerPoints, is to write a health and safety policy for the families. So you as a student are choosing the type of program that you're writing from, if you're an FCC or an infant toddler, and you're describing very concisely and very simply to parents how you keep their children healthy and safe, and if they get sick or they get hurt, how are you going to notify them? In our discussion board, if you have a friend and her first child is about to start any kind of school program for the first time, she's very concerned about him or her getting sick. So what would you tell her to look for in a program that's going to prioritize health and safety? So we know that there are certain components of having a healthy and safety program, healthy and safe program. What are the things that she should be looking for to make sure that this program is going to be a good fit for her family? And then additional resources. So I have a field trip checklist. So if you're leaving the center, what do you need to think about? I also have the FCC safety checklist that we had earlier, but if you wanted to look again, it's got some good ideas. Then there's an immunization requirements from California State, the YMCA Wellness Champion Program, which gives you priority referral if you take part in it, and then our administering medications PDF that talks about the 5 R's. So these are all additional resources that you can download and save for your director's file.